So thank you very much to to everybody that has expressed an interest. As I say, you're going to turn my anger into excitement because I think together, putting our heads together, we can make a difference. We were introduced to the project, the NGO movement, and inspired by Brooks Goldstein, who's the founder and um, behind the Lawfare Project, which I understand now the NGO hatred from listening to her, to Brooke yesterday. There are two formal chapters in the United States. In did I hear Los Angeles and New York? Um, and we hope maybe we'll add to that list. We're all of us are based, just so you know, in Toronto, but I think our aim is to grow this across Canada. Certainly, that would be in keeping with our organization, the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation. We certainly have members, followers that are from right across Canada and elsewhere. Um, so we have Brooke, and Brooke has kindly introduced us to Gerard, who you'll see there. Gerard, I understand you're senior counsel with the Lawfare Project, and you've been involved with the NG movement as an organizer. And Elliot, who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, but I understand you're in Texas. That's where my rescue dog comes from. Um,
One
and
more.
I'm sure you'll tell us a bit more about it, but I understand you're a grassroots, you've been described to me as the grassroots organizer. And that's what I think we need help for. I hope that we'll hear from them a little bit about what was the inspiration, what's the motivation, and really get to the tachlis of the real, how do we move forward? How do we organize ourselves? How do we grow? How do we get people to join in the civil rights movement, and so that we can make a difference in what is obviously concerning times? So perhaps I'll turn it over to Brooke. And
so with apologies to everyone, rather than asking you each to introduce yourself, which would take up 10-15 minutes, I'm just going to read out names, and please put up your hand in. The folks in the Lawfare Project will know you're here. If you've got your video off, please turn it on if you wouldn't mind, so we can see that you're here. So Judith Weinroth has joined us. She is a board member of CAEF, a retired physician and a strong Zionist activist. Irving Weisdorf is here. He's the past chair of CAEF. He's a businessman, and he's also a philanthropist who's been supporting this organization and a few others. Zachary Zarnett-Klein is here. There he is. Zachary is a student. He was actively watching what was going on at York University when they had their riot. He's now at Ryerson. He's been writing for Jewish press, and he's an excited activist to join us. Ben Dichter is here. He's, I would say, a Politico, a writer, a social media guru, somebody who's also been very involved in Zionist causes. Mike Fagelman isn't here yet, I don't think. No, Mike, if he joins us, is with Honest Reporting Canada. He's their CEO. Agnes Imani is here. I see her. She's the founder of Jews Against Anti-Semitism Canada and has gotten involved in organizing programs and wants to be more involved in activism. Rob Walker isn't on yet. He was just, oh, there he's coming. He just did the webinar with NGO Monitor, which was fabulous. So he's just coming. Vivian Ziner, I call our philanthropist activist. Shaker Rupper, she's here. And her daughter may be joining us, who's a law student and also a Zionist activist. Giddy Mammon is here. Where's Giddy? Saw Giddy, yes. You're in your car, Giddy, hi. And Giddy is a lawyer who also got involved in some of the activist stuff going on at York University and has volunteered to do more. Mark Zimmerman, I thought I saw Mark. Mark is here. Mark, I'm not entirely sure. You're involved in arts production, is that right?
Yeah, I produce live concerts and live theater.
Thank you.
In Canada.
And Eric Gilbert is here, and he's got a communications and marketing background, and delighted to see you, Eric. Carrie Katz is here. She's former president of, I think, ORT Canada. She's on our board of directors and is listening in today to see how she can get involved. Stuart Kamenetsky is a professor Here he is at U of T Psychology, and he's been involved in helping to organize some of the anti-Semitic stuff going on at U of T, and he'll tell us a little bit about that. I don't see Aaron Rosenberg. Maybe he's come. I don't know if he's coming. He's another lawyer. Anita is here. And did I miss anybody before we get to the lawfare people? That's
Mike
it.
Diamond.
Okay,
Michael Diamond.
Where are you? Oh, yes, because I didn't see you. Michael, you're in your car too. Must be the best place.
Yes.
Hold meetings. Mike is involved in many, many Jewish organizations. Mr. Jewish Organization. He's a philanthropist and investment manager, and he's a fabulous good friend of our organization. Thank you for joining us.
we've slotted, feel free to take your time. At the end, we have slotted about a half an hour, but let me know if that's the right amount of time. And then we'll open it to some questions thereafter.
Okay, thank you. So I just want to say I have until 10:15 for this, but I think we can cover everything.
Okay.
I love Canadians because I love how you're asking us, how can we organize ourselves? How can we move forward? How can we make a difference? And I think that's exactly why we're having this conversation today, because basically, you know, to sum up what I said yesterday, for those of you who weren't on the call, the point of the End Jew Hatred movement, the goal is to engage in actions to ensure that there are consequences for instances of Jew hatred, so that Jew hatred no longer becomes socially acceptable and permissible in public spaces. And being a Canadian myself, I think that Canada is really ripe for this. Canadian Jews are mobilized, they are organized, they are not affected so much as American Jews are when it comes to the divisive, partisan, political nature of our community, and that you are already mobilizing. Look what happened with food vendors. It came naturally. So we had a conversation right after, I think, the food vendors mobilization, and that's sort of what opened this up and why we thought Canada would be a right jurisdiction, and I agree. So from the email that was sent to me, I was asked, Anita, you wanted me to go into a little bit about what is End Jew hatred, what was the inspiration for it, the study, what the lessons we learned from the study we engaged in are, and then how to move forward, how to form a chapter. But I will say up front, number one, I think it's beyond that. I think that CAEF, or how do you refer to yourselves in the short?
Daniel Korn has said CAEF, so I've adopted that.
Should become an organizational partner. It's beyond just having a chapter. I think that you all should become an integral part of the movement together with the other. I think we have like 15 or 16 organizations right now that are officially partners in the movement, that are a part of the structure that Elliot's going to explain, where we all communicate and meet together and decide on actions and decide on statements. But more importantly, what we are doing is an element of cross-organizational partnership. Whereas if one organization is doing something, the purpose of the End Jew Hatred movement is to help that organization through End Jew Hatred achieve its goals, provided obviously that those goals are aligned with the End Jew Hatred mission statement. So the first thing, the first step is to read the mission statement, which I know you have, because also was attached a document where you took that mission statement, adopted it as your own. I didn't like compare every line, so I'm not sure what tweaks were made, but it looks quite good to me. And I know Elliot has read it. And you've also identified targets. And the second thing I want to say out front is that we live in, I think, as Andrea said at the beginning, a very target-rich environment. There's no shortage of Jew haters and anti-Semites that we can go after. I mean, that's kind of, I would say, a curse and a blessing, in the sense that we're often distracted. Every day we're getting an email about another Jew hater, and we're just kind of like catching up on how to defend and how to criticize. But what we've done strategically at End Jew Hatred is we latch on to a a target or a person or a company or a school that we know has engaged in extraordinarily bad behavior, and we ensure consequences, because sometimes it's more important to set an example than it is to chase after every single Jew hater and release a statement condemning them. So food vendors, for example, is a perfect case where you see the entire community ensured there were consequences from the legal end, which is where Lawfare Project played a role, from the political end, from the social end. There was mobilization going on, and you see there's real action, and establishes a precedent and example of how a Jew hater should be treated. So that's what I wanted to say up front. Now I'm going to get into what Andrea wanted me to do. I'm going to go really, really quickly, just to be respectful of everybody's time, open it up to Elliot, and then we can talk about, this moving forward. So basically, the bottom line is that the reason why the motivation behind the establishment of End Jew Hatred is because we recognize, I think like everybody here, an opportunity right now where there are the rise of very strong minority rights movements, whether it's Black Lives Matter or the New Women's Movement or LGBTQ movement or what have you, that are gaining strength and creating what are seismic shifts in the way that society deals with and behaves towards that and with that minority community. And Jews obviously have always been at the forefront of minority rights movements, from the civil rights movements to now we're organizing partners until we're kicked out because we're Zionists. And we're also advocating, progressive liberal Jews have basically been advocating that we should mobilize for others. Jews for LGBTQ, Jews for gay rights, Jews for women's rights, Jews against Trump, but there hasn't been a Jews for Jews movement. So to sum it up, End Jew Hatred is mobilizing Jews for Jews, using the lessons that we have learned from 21st century mass mobilization movements and using their strategies and tactics in a way that we feel will be successful for our community. So what are the lessons that we learned? What are the strategies and tactics that we're using? So first and foremost, the message, message is in the name. The goal is in the name. Black Lives Matter. You cannot be against Black Lives Mattering or you are a racist. Women's rights. Are you against women's rights? You cannot be, or you are, a
misogynist.
What we have done, one of the mistakes we've made is we've couched Jewish civil rights advocacy in its entirety around pro-Israel advocacy. The problem with that is that it creates a binary. If we are pro-Israel, then we recognize there's anti-Israel. And if I'm an objective person coming into the situation, I got to listen to both sides and I got to come out, at best somewhere in the middle, So we've created this situation where we've defined ourselves also in the lens and in reaction to the other. We haven't centered our advocacy on our own narrative, our own expressions of pain and trauma and our own unique history. And you see a lot of the attempts now of Jews to deny the uniqueness of our history, our Holocaust, by doing these, I don't even know what they're called, Elliot, these, Anne Frank is really a, Mexican migrant, or, ICE detention centers or concentration camps, or Trump is a Nazi, and taking our history and using it and appropriating it for partisan political purposes. And it not only undermines the uniqueness, but it also, again, decentralizes our pain, and it makes it universal when that's really not the case. The Jew plays an extraordinarily unique role, not only now, but in history. It is the oldest, we are the oldest, most persecuted minority in the world. Jew hatred has been systemic in Western culture for centuries, and it is the crux of the issue. It has to be dealt with uniquely. We should not be lobbying for San Francisco State University or, UCS to have racism and equality training in response to a Jewish student being targeted because she's a Jew. This is about Jew hatred, which is unique, and we have to push for education on it, number one. Number two, like I said, we have to resist the politicization of our pain and unify the community, because we have been played fools, where we are now divided to the extent that when Jew Hatred Movement organized a protest against Jew hatred on USC campus, I got an email from a Jew that showed up with the Trump hat saying he hasn't stood, and I cried. I literally cried when I read this email. He said, I am a pro-Trump Jew and I came to the End Jew Hatred protest. It was the first time in the last 4.5 years that I, a pro-Trump Jew, stood next to an anti-Trump Jew, and we chanted the same thing. We chanted End Jew Hatred. How powerful is that? That we had the opportunity to unify our community around a simple message that everyone can agree with, even non-Zionist Jews can agree with, that hatred against someone because their ethnicity, their culture, their religion, their skin color, their national origin is wrong. And if we take it away from centering on foreign conflict, we can unify the community, and we know what happens when Jews are unified. We have incredible strength. The other issue is that if our response to Jew hatred is, well, let's debate the points. Israel is a democracy. Israel has Arab MKs. Israel's not apartheid. We're not occupation. We play into the excuse, well, Jews can be targeted using Middle East politics as an excuse. So what do I mean by that? When San Francisco State University, when we sued them for First Amendment violations, civil rights violations, San Francisco State University did not deny the facts. There was no question of fact. Were Jewish students excluded from the Know Your Rights Fair? Yes. Was a Jewish event run by Hillel shut down? Yes. Those facts were not disputed. What was disputed was the essence of what the motive was. The school said to us, yeah, Jewish students were excluded, but not because they're Jewish, because they're Zionists. And Zionism is a political point of view. And what we were able to do with our settlement was make California State University recognize in a legally binding document that Zionism is an integral part of the Jewish religious identity. And therefore targeting a Jew because of their identity. And as Eliza Lewin so perfectly and much better than me articulated yesterday, Zionism is so integral to our religion, and that's the subject of a Zoom. All of us agree, I don't have to get into how or why, that it is a civil rights issue. It is not a political issue. So when we respond to Jew hatred with debates on pro-Israel, with debates on a political issue 1,000 miles away, we legitimize that. When we use the terminology of our enemy, BDS, the acronym. Most people don't know what BDS is. The reason why a lot of people know what it is because we have conferences and Zoom calls, and what is BDS? And we promote the enemy of our narrative, and instead of promoting shared spaces to talk about intergenerational trauma, that in Jewish advocacy, for example. And we also call it by their name. We call it BDS. What BDS is unlawful commercial discrimination against someone because of a protected category, because of their national origin, their religion, and their ethnicity. If you go to someone again on the street, the man on the street example, you say, are you pro BDS? Well, what's BDS movement? Well, BDS movement is something that objects to the crimes of Israel. So we promote a boycott just like South Africa, and you get into this whole fucking blah, blah, blah. It's like mental masturbation. But if you go to someone and say, hey, are you for not selling something to someone because of their skin color? Are you for not engaging in a business relationship with someone because of their religion? That's racist, right? So do you think we should boycott someone because of where they were born? Do you think that we should turn around to an Iranian businessman? So I'm not going to do business with you. Or, hey, Mr. Chinese person, I'm not going to do business with you because I object to the Chinese government handling of COVID. Or, hey, I'm going to have a business and say no Africans allowed because I object to the government of Sudan. That's the definition of racism, to project the alleged crimes of a foreign government on a person and discriminate against that person because of their skin color, their national origin, their religion, their identity, their ethnicity. That is racist. So a whole change of language so that we are talking and operating in a civil rights paradigm, because that's what's resonating right now. We need to be talking about, for example, the fighting oppression here and now, justice for the Jews, the redemption of the academic space, workplace discrimination. We need to talk about decolonizing Judaism. We need to reject the entanglement of Middle Eastern politics and the civil rights movements of the Jewish people, and so on and so forth. That doesn't mean that Zionism, again, is not integral. It just means that a civil rights movement that has never been established there's never been a Jewish civil rights movement in the West. There's been a nationalist movement to establish the state of Israel. There's never been a Jewish civil rights movement because we're not speaking the language of civil rights. We're not positioning ourselves as minorities who are victims of the same type of systemic oppression that other minorities are victims of. So we need to recenter around that. The other lessons we learned, I think, are crucial. Number 3, the way that we're organized. The 21st century mass mobilization movements are true grassroots movements. I remember 15 or what was it, like 10 or 12 years ago when we first learned, Obama's only qualification was a community organizer. Ha ha ha, what the hell is that? Well, now I'm not laughing. Now I know exactly what that is. That's called going boots on the ground into local communities, training leaders, making seed grants, establishing chapters, allowing them to operate with a level of, it creates a sense of plausible deniability too, where each arm of the movement can use the central command center, let's say, and can use the partnerships and can use the mission statement to their own ends. It's gotten to the point where it's so bad, and I know this firsthand, where you cannot organize, you cannot mobilize a Jewish community without getting the buy-in of like Federation and Conference of Presidents and this international and that international. They all have boards, they all have donors, and they're not going to give the go-ahead, take their 10,000 mailing list and blast out, hey, Jews, show up outside of food vendors Monday at Tuesday night and we can get 3,000 people there. It doesn't happen in the Jewish community because we're not organized that way. We're so top down. When you think about it, look at the leaders of the so-called progressive left. Linda Sarsour, Tamika Mallory. Who the hell are these people? They are trained, they are handpicked, they are given seed funding. You have someone like George Soros, who's basically, who's orchestrating a level of grassroots mobilization and community organizing that we have never done. So that's why that is basically Elliot's expertise. And when I turn it over to him very shortly, Elliot's going to explain the actual structure of the movements and how they operate and how you can join as an organization or as a chapter. The final lesson that we learned obviously is imposing consequences. And I don't think I need to get into that with this group. Jews write letters telling people how very angry they are. Other civil rights movements shut down bridges. All it takes, for example, are 2 people with a can of red paint, throw it on someone with fur, and you've made international headlines everywhere. So what we are about are these types of direct actions and picking our targets very carefully and wisely. An example of that, for example, is what happened with Leila Khaled. Not that Zoom was a target in any rate, but when everybody was writing letters to SFSU saying how very angry they were that they're hosting a terrorist, asking them, pretty please cancel her, and SFSU came back with saying, I'm sorry, free speech, free speech. We as the lawyers looked at this as a material support for terrorism issue and appealed to the in-house council of Zoom, which I think rightfully made the decision. And so did other hosting companies like YouTube and Google, Facebook, whatever they were. I know that one is owned by other in one of those. And they took that, they deplatformed that terrorist. And then there are other actions happening to complement that. So we have things that are coming up as well that our partners are organizing. And what we have established to conclude is the first ever and the only movement whose goal is to provide the legal, strategic, and financial support for the Jewish community to mobilize themselves against Jew hatred. And I think the sticking point, what I'll leave you with is this. End Jew hatred is a symbiotic relationship. It's not an organization. It's not a 501c3. It's an idea. It's a movement. It's an affiliation between multiple organizations, activists, influencers, and so forth. It is modeled after how every other social movement is operating right now. We're very late in the game, but we are doing it. And it works both ways. Organizations and partners help end Jew hatred, the movement, but the movement is primarily here to provide the logistical, strategic, financial, and legal support so that your activities can be amplified and carried out to the greatest extent. So with that, I'm gonna put my final conclusion, which is based on the proposal that you sent. You have a list of targets here. I would humbly suggest the following. Number one, the first most important thing that you need to do is read the mission statement, which you have, and sign on, publicly sign on and identify yourself with the movement, whether it's a hashtag End Jew Hatred, whether it's putting the End Jew Hatred logo on your website, which is what all of our partners are doing, whether it's doing your own action and saying we're doing this as a partner of the End Jew Hatred movement. You have to publicly establish yourself as belonging to it. And the second most important thing is pick one. It is a target-rich environment. Carefully, and I know we spoke about this in the last call, pick what you think is the most pressing issue when it comes to Jew hatred, the biggest Jew hater. And then we have a team of strategizers who will work through with you how you can engage, how Lawfare can engage, and how the rest of the organizational partners can all work together to help you achieve the mission of ensuring consequences for that particular Jew hater. The second and third thing on your list should be recruiting influencers in Canada to speak publicly about these issues and to tweet and to reshare on social media your action with the hashtag End Jew Hatred, and engaging in training workshops. So another thing we're doing is Elliot is hosting free training workshops for top level activists. So just like we're doing this exact call, bringing in the top 10 activists in Canada, training them on the language, giving them legal training on knowing their rights, giving them training on mobilization, and then setting them free to use what we've established for them for their own purposes. So Elliot, let's go to you if you don't mind. And if you can talk about the organizational structure and what it means to be a partner and a chapter and so forth, and answer whatever questions everybody has.
Okay, thank you so much, Brooke. Hi, everyone. My name is Elliot. I have been researching political movements for the past 10 years. I initially started working on radical Islam. I later branched out to research into fascism. I looked a lot into the far left movements. I wrote testimony that was submitted to Congress. I ghost wrote speeches for activists who spoke to the UN. I participated in a panel at the House of Lords in the UK. And I'm very, very excited and very grateful to be part of this movement, End Jew Hatred movement. Brooke initially commissioned me to do the deep dive study into Black Lives Matter and into the New Women's Movement to learn about what makes them effective, why they're effective, and how we can replicate these strategies and tactics for the Jewish community. First thing I want to say is the time is now. We are in a very, very positive situation. This year in particular has been super 20th century paradigm that everyone was previously operating on. I think that in the world in general, there is a sense that we're stepping into a new era. And that is very, very positive for us, because what we want to create is a paradigm shift in how people perceive Jews. And we want to create a situation in which the Jew is no longer the go-to scapegoat for whenever things go wrong. This was a part of what we took in the recent protest that we organized against Andrew Cuomo. And he was trotting out the tired stereotype of, the Jews are the plague spreaders. And we stood up to say, no, not this time. We're not going to let you stereotype us in the same old way, the same old tropes. So How does this work? We have set up a End You Hatred Central, which is basically an organized meeting, a regular series of meetings between our organizational partners. So to be an organizational partner, you read the manifesto and you sign on to the manifesto. We ask that all our partners put the logo, End You Hatred logo, on their own personal websites. And then after that, you are free to and encouraged to take actions on behalf of End You Hatred whenever you want. This is a decentralized movement. Please do not wait for central authorization. There is nobody who's going to sign off and say, this is the authorized plan. What there is collaboration, shared strategizing, and an open channel, which you'll be invited other partners to coordinate actions rapidly in response to any given incidents. So where we have chapters and we have partner organizations. So how it works is we have meetings once a month between all the partners and all the chapter heads, and everybody gets one vote, and that vote determines what the priorities for the movement are in terms of mobilization, right? What's our main focus going to be? But beyond that, each individual chapter and each individual partner organization is encouraged to really do their own thing once you are on board with the movement as a whole. How we want to operate that is we want to run training sessions. We want to teach people about the mindset that we want people to adopt, which is really a movement, a mindset of transformative justice. It's a mindset that centers healing intergenerational trauma, recognizing Jewish pain, and saying, we've been oppressed for a long time. We need you to hear us. We need you to hear our story. We're going to reclaim our narrative. We're not going to let you define our narrative for us. And it's about how we feel. We feel that a big mistake that the Jewish community has made over the past decade is getting bogged down into various particular discussions about this policy and that policy and the facts in 1967 and should Ariel order be and all of this kind of thing, which is very counterproductive. It's very political. What we want to talk is how a Jewish student on campus feels when a BDS activist is screaming in their face and calling them a child killer. We want to talk about how a Jewish person feels, as one of Brooks' client, Jeffrey Flack, was excluded from meetings at the City University of New York because he was a Jew. They were deliberately scheduling them on Friday night. We want to talk about this centering pain and centering feeling rather than talking in this kind of excessively logical way. Again, I would refer you to the manifesto on our website for more information on exactly the kind of language, and I'm happy to answer questions about that and give particular training to activists that you want to be involved with us on the kinds of language that we want to use. In terms of coming on as a partner or a chapter organization, since you already have an organization, I would recommend being a partner, but it would also be worth setting up a End You Hatred Toronto chapter. A specific chapter, which would have a chapter head. You would have meetings, once a month, once every couple of weeks, however often you want. And we would be a resource for you guys to tap into to say, okay, we're thinking about going after this target. We're thinking about going after that. Could you provide us with messaging guidance? Could you provide us with other contacts in the area? How do you think communicating with you, helping you, strategizing you, but really the on the ground actions would be coming from you, and you would be physically going and doing whatever actions. The final thing, and then I want to open it up to questions, is, as Brooke said, this is a very target rich environment. The thing about direct action is you don't have to get everyone. It is important to successfully take down one or two targets. And this is something that we see with the Black Lives Matter and the New Women's Movement, is they were successful in staging very, very high profile demonstrations and takedowns of high profile targets in very specific individual cases. And by taking one story, displaying it in full color, telling everyone, getting people's emotional buy-in, and then using that to leverage the movement in order to create a change in the public perception in a broad way. So you do not need to take down every single Jew hater. You just have to take down enough individuals that it creates a sense in the society that something has changed, that being a Jew hater is unacceptable. And that is what the victory that we're looking for is. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and I don't know what specific areas you guys want to open it up to questions now at this point, so that you guys can get a sense of where we're holding. Can I jump in here? I want to say that this is basically exactly the plan, right? We're not an individual organization. We are a grassroots movement. So right now we have a lot of organizations working with us in America as partners, and we want to invite CAEF and any other Jewish organization to join us as a partner. That doesn't mean that End Jew Hatred endorses any individual, whatever everyone else is doing in the normal way of things. You know, we're cross-denominational, we're apolitical, we're not left-wing, we're not right-wing, we're not reform, we don't do Kirov. And it's really about creating a grassroots movement that centers Jewish liberation and justice, and not being another 501c3 that collects dollars and then sends out newsletters, and then once a month we have every now and again we have a gala, and that's it.
I want to add to that. So these are exactly the conversations that we were having 4 months ago. And what we realized is we were still thinking in our paradigm, and it's not our fault, because this is how we think. And, a lot of even some of the initial donors who, are buying into this now are like, well, how can Lawfare Project be a part of End Jew Hatred? How is it within your mission statement? And it was funny because the answer was, we have a problem if we think that a Jewish civil rights organization should not be involved in civil rights advocacy. Like, the fact that we've boxed ourselves in like that with these mission statements is insane, and has prevented us from doing this cross-organizational partnership and this movement building. And so what Vivian is saying, we are very sensitive to that. But the fact is that you guys are coming in this like 5 months later, and just because you might be the 16th organization to join, but you're the first in Canada. So I don't think being in the first in Canada labels End Jew Hatred a CAEF thing. It's you're joining the movement. And what that means is it gives you power, because when you decide in your committee, there's Jew Hater at UFT Toronto campus, End Jew Hatred movement, and all of our organizational partners are going to be partnering with you to do your action. So you're already, you're strengthening yourself already by joining a movement, and that's the point. But one of the ideas that I had is a brilliant thing that CAEF can do that is branded itself and End Jew Hatred, but is also meant to increase the scope of its breadth and its reach, is create a safe space for students, like your son, like your daughter, for all students all over Canada to get together in a closed webinar that's not for the public. It's not about debating the enemy or convincing anyone to like us, to talk about their experiences, and bringing in social media influencers that we can bring to you, okay, that aren't already associated with your movement, to moderate something like that. And it'll brand you as the go-to place in terms of 21st century mobilization and community. I don't want to keep saying organizing, but it's mobilization. You'll be mobilizing these people in an apolitical way that has nothing to do with Canadian politics or Middle Eastern politics. And you'll have the branding of End Jew Hatred behind you. So that was just one idea that I had. And by becoming an organizational partner, you are under the umbrella, so it gives that legitimacy. But also having a chapter means that CAEF's members can have a controlling element, because you will be setting up the organization of that chapter and the voting structure of that chapter and inviting people into it. So you do have an element of control over the branding there.
A couple of things. I'm not sure if I'm out of turn on this. This is really, it sounds to me like a focus on partnering people into this new initiative. I loved what Brooke was talking about in terms of the creation of a civil rights movement for Jews. The question is how to execute. We are terribly outnumbered as Jews. We're a very, very small group. The BLM was very successful for two reasons. Number one, demographically, they are much more significant in terms of numbers and tied to US history. And I also think that they're able to use tactics which are not going to be suitable for the Jewish community. So I think using that example is problematic.
I'll just decide. I took a bunch of notes, so my response might be all over the place because I think Giddy, you hit on a lot of things. So number one, you need to decide your strategy. Nobody's going to tell you what is effective, what is not effective. Every partner organization has their different strategy and their different goals. And the fact is that we're all working together to help each other. That's the strength. I was on the WhatsApp call with we have a core group of 12 organizational partners on a WhatsApp call that I'd like to put you in on. And what is happening is amazing. One of the organization's entire goal, that's all they do, their only mission statement is to lobby for IHRA to be adopted. So we're having a meeting. How can each organization support that organization's efforts to do that, as opposed to every organization running around with a chicken's head cut off and having their own strategy about IHRA? So it's a centralized way to funnel an incredible amount of power and support. Yeah, we don't have the numbers, but that's not our asset. We have so many better assets than just numbers. And I would argue that the Black Lives Matter movement behavior has not strengthened it, it has undermined it, and they have not succeeded in shifting public opinion towards what they want. They've become highly politicized, and opinions about the Black community and what's happening right now, I wouldn't say are positive surrounding Black Lives Matter. That's not the goal of End Jew Hatred. We study Black Lives Matter, New Women's Movement, and other movements, including, communism and fascism and everything that Elliot's, an expert in, not because we want to be like them, but because we want to pick and choose and study the strategies and tactics that work for them and apply them to achieve our particular goals. So when you've decided as your chapter organization, we decided we want to focus our resources and work with End Jew Hatred on taking down this professor or IHRA adoption, then we will come in and provide you with all of our expertise and knowledge to help you do what you have chosen to do. The other thing I want to say really importantly is we always tend to plan and get so bogged down in the planning. When we did our first mobilization effort, which was the protest at the Grove, where we were targeting Rick Caruso, the chairman of USC and also the owner of the Grove and other properties, a billionaire and apparently running for mayor, and that we chose him on purpose. We decided we were not going to pick up the phone and call and ask every organization if they want to sponsor it. We just did it. And when word got out that we were doing it, we got the calls from the organization saying, how can we be a part of it? Because eventually they have to. It does not look good. If they say they're fighting campus anti-Semitism and there's a huge protest happening supported by 12 to 15 other organizations, and they're not one of the quote sponsors of that, it doesn't look good for them. So keep in mind the movie Wayne's World, where the great Canadian scholar, Mike Myers, or what's his name, from Wayne's World, it's Mike Myers, right, said, build it, they will come. Don't waste your time going to big bureaucracies and asking them to be a part of your new idea. They're not going to sign on. They're going to sign on after the fact. And it's not just philosophy. I mean, that's exactly what's happening right now. So those are my comments. Elliot, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I have a few comments. In terms of choking off the spigot in terms of Twitter and Facebook and everything. First of all, that's exactly what we did in the Zoom case. Brooke and Gerard were very on it to contact SFSU and to contact Zoom, and we were successful in deplatforming Layla Khalid from Zoom and Facebook and YouTube, all within 24 hours of launching the action. So I have a few follow-up points on that. The first is you do not need to, as I said before, you don't need to take down everyone. We're living in a media society, right? There's 8 billion people on this rock, and is all kinds of crazy things happening all the time. It's about capturing attention, which means doing high profile stunts, which like that, like the Zoom thing, which don't require a lot of people, but do get a lot of results. When we did that action, we were quoted in The Intercept, we were quoted in the Jerusalem Post, we were in the New York Post, we made international headlines. And that means that people sitting on their phones and reading it at home now think, oh, wait a minute, maybe if I engage in Jew hatred, maybe there'll be consequences for me. And that little thought in the back of their head, that is our victory. That is what we're going for here. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that, Andrew Breitbart said that politics is downstream from culture. Culture is downstream from technology. The fact is that for the first time in human history, everyone is carrying a camera on it, and we can communicate from anywhere in the world instantly, pretty much. And that means we can streamline our organization. It means that decentralized organizations of aggressive, highly motivated, intelligent people can make incredible change very, very quickly. Our primary organization is on WhatsApp. We use WhatsApp groups primarily, and we use Zoom calls, and we network with people to create fast responses to something. Something has to happen fast. Don't wait for you have 6 planning meetings, and then, eventually in 2 months we'll roll something out. It's like, no, something happens. You need to respond within 24 hours, 48 hours, really maximum, in order to do something. If it's a rapid response to an individual thing, if it's more of an ongoing case, then you have a little longer. But the main thing that I'm trying to stress here is strike. Action is the thing. Like talking about it, right? And anything can be an action, from standing outside in the street with a sign that says "End Jew Hatred," putting a bumper sticker on your car that says "End Jew Hatred," calling your congressman to tell them that End Jew Hatred exists and you're appalled by the terrible things they said on CNN last night. Whatever it is, action. And we are going to gain the broad-based notoriety and the perception that something is changing in the world through these repeated acts. There's a concept in psychology called frame, right? Which is the reality through which people see the world. So at the moment, we're living in a reality where if you say something negative about a Black person or about Black people in general, you are now the worst. And you know that in your head. And what we're trying to do is reframe how people talk about Jews. And we don't reframe it by asking them. We simply create the frame in our language and in the way that we talk, and then we put it out there in the world, and then you just hold, and you refuse to acknowledge that the other person's frame is real, and you just emote your own position over and over again until they are overwhelmed and accept your frame. Right. This is the emotional way of political combat that is going on at the moment. Right. The best example, I guess, of this in recently is the successful attempt by the trans lobby to force everyone to use transgender pronouns. Right. And again, I'm not saying anything about transgender people in this comment. It's a description of a strategy that worked. I'm not making any comment one way or another about the LGBTQ plus movement. They didn't ask, oh, hey, excuse me, guys, like, would you nouns, maybe changing things to use they, them, or to address. They just kept saying over and over again, trans women are women. If I say I'm a him, call me him, and that's it. And don't explain, don't argue with people. Ben Shapiro always says, facts don't care about your feelings. What we're saying is feelings do not care about your facts. You have to bring emotion, and you have to bring swift action, and you have to hold frame and just put out your psychological vision of reality until the other person accepts it. I'm going to pause.
I just want to add to that, because it's really important. Let me just add, this is really important. So we talk about, oh, these stunts, and it kind of like minimizes what it is. It's not a stunt. It's actions that are meant to appeal to emotions. And a good example of this on the other side is their die-ins, where they pretend to be Palestinians who are killed and they just lie on the floor with blood. We respond to that by arguing the points. The way that we respond to BDS votes on student government is we argue the points as opposed to just proposing our own BDS resolutions on systemic Jew hatred. How is it that not one Jewish student group has proposed their own resolution? It's insane. So it's this paradigm shift, which is why the training is so important. If you don't want to engage in an action, what you should do is use End Jew Hatred's resources to train your activists, to talk about this, to talk about what works, to talk about what doesn't work, to talk about a paradigm shift in the language. And the other thing is, again, there's two parts of this. There's going out and spotlighting Jew haters, but there's also the equally, and I would argue even more important part of Jewish empowerment. Okay, it's changing the way Jews are perceived, but also changing the way that Jews perceive themselves and engage in advocacy. And that is so important because right now, Jews, there's such a thirst. You know, every single one of my Jewish friends posted Black Lives Matter because they felt socially compelled to do it. We need to give the Jewish community what is the equivalent of virtue signaling for Jewish empowerment, not posting a why Israel is not an apartheid state thing on Facebook that's going to spark debate and you'll probably lose friends and it's not going to make you look cool. What is the Jewish selfie with your fist in the air? Okay, that's what we're going for here. And with that, we have the experts. So when you've decided, or let's say you have 3 people or targets you want to spotlight, come to us and we will help you think through them in a strategic way and provide our expertise, but ultimately the choice is yours.
I'll just give you one sentence and then Benjamin can take over. I wanted to know how individuals attach themselves to the movement. Do we have a process for that?
Any individual at any time can proclaim themselves a supporter of the End Jew Hatred movement and simply get on with it by agreeing with our statement.
Signal on social media, use the hashtag End Jew Hatred, and come to and join a direct action or participate in a training seminar. Those are 3 actual things you can do.
The word you're looking for is stochastic, which is basically you put out in the world a vision and you propagate it through media channels, and then individual people will see it, hear it, and act on their own. And it means that you can't be intercepted. It means that you can't be shut down. It means that there's no membership list, which the other side can track. And it enables you to have a vastly greater reach and be a lot more flexible than if you are waiting for the federation to send out a mailing list.
And you want to be an End Jew Hatred voice. You can have, and haven't even thought about this, but what would be the problem with our organizational partners having their own grassroots organizer in that jurisdiction with an endjewhatred.com email address from which they can send? I mean, we own the domains. So whatever the issue is, we can problem solve it. And you can be perceived for one action a certain way, for another training seminar another way, and you can also use it for your own fundraising purposes. That's the beauty of it. You can send out an email from CAEF saying, we are part of the movement, donate now to us, to you.
The ADL, for example, and their collaboration with Facebook and YouTube is one of the biggest accelerants towards anti-Semitism that's occurring in the tech space right now, especially amongst younger people. With one particular example, this girl who I know of, she had a career, she was building a platform, she was becoming very popular. And on their podcast, they uttered the 14 words, not understanding the significance of why it's offensive. And by the way, I didn't know either. And the ADL and YouTube and the big tech started destroying them, deplatformed them, canceled their careers. So here's a girl who was making close to 200K a year, who is now making nothing. And who's she going to blame? She's going to blame the people who just deplatform. And what this tactic is public shaming. That's what this is. And I think it just lends itself to blow up in our face. And I can tell you that because I engage with these people on a regular basis and all the time. Yeah, you can't talk about the guys with the little hats because if you do, they're going to destroy your career. So I would be very, and remember, I'm very confrontational. When we did Al Quds Day a few years ago, and this goes to what Brooke was talking about and Elliot about framing, when I suggested instead of giving facts about Israel, why don't we just caricature it and help them celebrate Al Quds Day? We'll celebrate throwing gays off of buildings because that's what they're supportive of. And the usual retort from the media was not there because it looked ridiculous to steelman those people.
Those Jews who are opposed to you, irrelevant, because we are building the movement of Jews for Jews, and we will outshout them, and they are already becoming irrelevant. Every jurisdiction is unique. There are different strategies and tactics that work for one action and don't work for others. The central group has created a strategy group whose goal is to go through every step. Well, if we do this, that might happen. If that happens, then what happens? What's their goal? What's it? And map everything out before you engage in an action.
Our movement is centered around healing intergenerational trauma and healing pain. We are not saying we are blaming person X. We're saying we're in a situation where there is systemic Jew hatred in Western civilization. We need to heal the Jew who is suffering the pain. And we also need to heal and decolonize the person who is inflicting the pain. We say, listen, man, we don't hate you. We hate this narrative that's stuck in your head. We're offering you a chance for redemption and to change this whole paradigm. We don't want to be locked in a battle with you forever, screaming at each other on the internet. We are inviting you to participate in a exchange of reconciliation. And if you refuse to do that, yeah, we're going to go to war. But we are inviting you to be reconciled.
And I'll be brief and thank you, everyone. So let me jump right in. I wanted to focus a little bit on the university angle. Being a university student myself, I was on the York campus last year when the huge riots were going on November 2019, and I engaged in a lot of activism work thereafter, going all the traditional routes, meeting with all of the advocacy organizations, the elected officials, putting out op-eds, the whole thing. So I hear you when you talk about a paradigm shift, because a lot of those avenues that I traveled really went nowhere. I'm concerned about virtue signaling. I'm concerned about us putting so much stock into the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, because at the end of the day, it's really just more words on the paper. We had a recent, the government of Ontario recently adopted the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, but that doesn't change the situation for Jews on the ground one bit. I'm also concerned in terms of universities get by when they have incidents of anti-Semitism. They just have a report commissioned. It takes 6 months to a year. Everybody forgets about why the report was undertaken in the first place. Nothing changes. I'm wondering also. I wanted to say that I like how your motto is so short and snappy. End Jew hatred. Anti-Semitism, not everybody gets, but anti-Jew, hopefully that will make more sense. So I like the directness of that. I wanted to ask you, it sounds, I might be misunderstanding, but it sounds to me like you're taking some of the language of the left, like decolonize or systemic oppression. What I would like to see to be a target, I would like to see us target York University for the mural that's been hanging in their student center for years now, despite
paint over it. Send someone there with a paintbrush and paint over it.
Listen, I gotta go, but I want to say I think it would be really good to host a webinar with you about the lessons that you learned going that traditional route, being an advocate on campus, to teach, again, an internal one by invitation only, where we select advocates and you teach them what you learned, what worked, what didn't work, and we have like a hashing out session about it.
I'll be very brief because I could give you about an hour long conversation about what happened at U of T over the past year since November, when we had the sort of infamous kosher scandal affair that after that, Professor Howard Tenenbaum and I, together with B'nai B'rith, really got things mobilized at the University of Toronto. And in some ways we were very successful because for the first time in I don't know how many years, perhaps since Israel Apartheid Week started at the University of Toronto about 10 years ago, there was a sort of concerted effort by University of Toronto faculty to really take a strong stand against all of this and battle and support students in this whole affair. So that was a first in a long time. And I think that the first we ever had at U of T is this public announcement by the University of Toronto that it is putting together a working group to fight anti-Semitism at the University of Toronto. So that's a first ever sort of public admission that the University of Toronto actually has a problem with anti-Semitism. So all I want to end with is that if there is going to be a Toronto chapter, I'd be very, I'd highly recommend that you pick as its first target the University of Toronto.